Today's session is going to focus on note customization, and some of the navigation and functionality may be review for some, but I also will cover some of the newer functionality that's been released. So just diving in, just want to kind of start with the configuration side of things. That's where a lot of this is going to take place, is under configure, list configuration, and under the notes section. So gonna start with just the note templates section. A lot of times this can be a bit confusing for folks, but just want to kind of go through some of the basics. So if you add a new template in here, or you're editing an existing template, some of the key parts here, one of the first things is defining the note type. So you can kind of ignore this last one for now, but the first three, these are really the three note types that you can build upon in OnTarget. The first being clinical. So that's really, you may be more familiar with a PI note, so purpose, intervention, effectiveness. Grid notes, certainly that's using like note keys, using interventions and assessments. A medical note template, I would say, is probably the closest thing to a blank canvas for note creation. So that's kind of again, just a blank canvas where you can kind of create, using drop downs and check boxes, and it doesn't necessarily tie back directly to a treatment plan in terms of the start and end dates and goals. One thing to note there, and I'll go ahead and mention this, if you're building out a note template, medical note templates are not currently supported by the mobile app. So do definitely keep that in mind if you're building a template, that would be structured specifically for use with the desktop. So let's kind of start with some of the options here. Again, you're typically going to define the note type. Is it clinical, grid, or medical? So if we said this is clinical, that would be, again, a PI note. The other things that you can define here is it multi-day? So are you going to be allowing for multiple dates of service to be captured within a single PI note? Or the next one would be multi-time. So that would be allowing for multiple blocks of time to be captured within a single date of service on a clinical note. So, if I wanted to have a block of time from 9 to 11, and then I wanted a second block of time for the staff to capture from, say, 3 to 5, and I want all of that to aggregate and be on that single note, that's where we're talking about multi-time. Group, that is used specifically for residential and shift scheduling type notes right now. So if you're using that functionality, you likely already know and are using that. But again, specific to shift scheduling and residential notes. This next one is actually new, the include primary ICD-10 category. So when that is selected, the ICD-10, the diagnosis code, will be included on the note. So that's a really good new feature that you can actually select. So that would actually pull from the client record and actually populate to the note. The category would go there. The next thing, again, is if you add a grid note, this top one entry key, entry per key set, is specific to grid notes. So this basically says only allow one selection of an intervention key type, only allow one selection of an assessment key type. Okay. And again, these other options, multi-day and multi-time, all of this is still the same for grid. I do want to go ahead and just create a quick template. So I'm going to create a clinical note. And let me just call this webinar note so we know this is a brand new note. And I'll include primary ICD-10. Let's go ahead and do that. And I'm just going to make it a single day. So we're not going to do multi-day or multi-time. Okay. And so in that grid, you will now see, there it is at the very bottom, webinar note. A couple of options here so you can see where all of those different categories or the different options have been selected, multi-day, multi-time. It will kind of indicate like what type of selections have been made. Is it active or not? So you can make it active or you can inactivate the template type. And then there's also a clone feature, which is just like a big copy paste of that template type. So that's really the basics of kicking off the new template that you want to start and then build from. Couple of things here. I'm going to go very quickly just around note keys. These are, again, specific to grid notes. So the big types here are the intervention and assessment. The first two here, intervention, meaning this is typically what the staff did, right? This is the intervention that was provided, was that verbal prompting was provided, was gesture prompting provided, modeling, right? So that's the intervention. Assessment types, those would be things like the goal was met, right? The goal was not met. There was a refusal. Those are the kind of things we're talking about here. The key to know here, I'll just kind of go through a couple of things. If I could just go here to the yes and no. The is a comment. That is how you can make one of the grid note cells an actual comment field. So if that's selected, that would actually be a comment on the grid. Require comment, that's pretty self-explanatory. If that particular key type is selected, then a comment would be required. That's very useful for things like refusals, for not applicable. Show in dashlet, this is super important too. If you want the calculations to be included. Okay, so if you're familiar with the dashlets where the calculations are performed, where we see percent of progress, that means include that particular key in the progress summary, include it in the calculations. So for instance, you may not want to include the NAs that are scored. And then finally, the allowed keys. So if you need to actually score, say, for instance, the number of verbal prompts, right? 0 through 9, 0 through 99, then you would apply a number. If you're simply just wanting, hey, was this selected or not, you're typically using an X or a Y for yes. Okay, so that's really the basics of that. The other would be this drag and drop. So if you need to change the sort order of the keys, and this actually applies to the left and right orientation of a grid node. And I'm going to open a grid node in just a few minutes, so we can just kind of get a visual on that. The sort ordering is just left click, drag and drop, and that vertical orientation corresponds to the left, right, the horizontal orientation of the intervention and the assessment keys. So again, just a quick rundown of the note keys. I'm just going to pick, again, a quick grid node in here so we can get a visual on that from Johnny Cool. And so again, this is what we're talking about. This is just a standard grid node, and we've got the independent verbal prompting, gesture, physical prompt, right? Goal was met, goal was not met for assessments. And then we have comments. And then we have the allowed keys. If I hover over, and again, that left to right orientation, that's all controlled by that vertical drag and drop back at note keys. All right. So moving along, I do want to go through the actual customization piece. Right, so this is the core part of note customization, and that's actually, again, back at configure, list configuration, notes, and custom fields. This is where we're going to spend really the rest of our time. Under custom fields, okay, this is where using different note elements, things like checkboxes, drop downs, numbers, text areas, text fields. You can build out a custom node template. You can add to a grid template, right? So you can have your grid, but then you can add custom elements to that. You can have a pie note and you can add custom elements to that. And that's exactly what I'm going to demonstrate here is using that webinar note that I just started. And again, that was a pie note. That was a clinical note. So starting that, I click on Add Custom Field, and it's a node type. That's all you can select there. And then we're going to select Webinar Note, which is right here. And then right here, I'm going to say right here and again, this would be something like a mental health note, right? Or like, let's say outpatient. You know, I see this a lot with like pie notes, right? So we would have something like, you know, client presented title thoughts, right? And so this may be just something as simple as a checkbox. Okay, and then you can define the position, and you've really only got 4 options here, and this determines where does it fall on the actual form. And we're going to take a look at the actual finished product here in just a few minutes. But is it in the header section, right? Is it up where the service and the client name and the data service, is it up in that area? Is it at the start? Start is a relatively new positioning. It's something that just came in probably a couple of months ago. And it really means to present it right below the header, but just before, in this instance, where the PIE would start, the purpose intervention effectiveness. Body, in terms of grid node, in terms of the purpose intervention effectiveness, this would fall below that. So that's really kind of the difference here. It's sort of, is it coming above the grid or the purpose, or is it falling below the grid or below the E section of the PIE? And then footer, that would just be at the very, very, very bottom. So in this case, I'm going to say, yep, I want this to actually be in the header. Required, we'll talk about some of these fields here in just a second. I'm going to go ahead and save this. And if I scroll here to the bottom, I can see that's where it started. That's where it actually saved it. So I do want to save a couple of others here. Just kind of keep moving here. Again, note the template type is my webinar. Client was recently hospitalized, right? So these are the type of things that we may see. One thing to note, what I'm showing works for all note types. So this would work for grid notes. This would work if you're building out a medical note template. The process is going to be the same. It's just kind of the way it presents, and some of the other elements may be different, but otherwise this works for all note types. Again, I'm going to say this is a checkbox. I'm going to say that this is going to belong to the header. And I'm going to go ahead and save that. And there you go. You can just see where I'm kind of building it. And we're going to get a visual again. I can't really see what this looks like yet, but when I go to test it and I actually add the note, I'm going to see exactly what this looks like. A couple of other fields, let's go ahead and add on here to make it a little, you know, kind of interesting. Webinar node, and let's say presenting symptoms requiring immediate action. All right, and maybe I want this to be a long text field. And let's say that this is going to be start. This is going to go right up top in the start. So maybe below, just below the header, but just ahead of the purpose section of the PIE. All right, a couple of other things here. Let's just add maybe the body inside another section to the body. And let's say maybe we want to capture some additional comments. right? Maybe this is a short text. Let's say this is just a short area, right? And then you could make this required. This could be, again, a required field. We're going to put this in the body. We're going to make this after. And then let's say, yeah, let's just for the sake of kind of seeing this as a required field, send note supervisor task if field completed. That's a really interesting one. I see that with things like body checks or like hey, if was client hospitalized, right? If that checkbox is selected, for instance, the send note supervisor task would send a task message to the assigned supervisor of the client. So that's a really, really good one. That's a really important one. Again, just for the sake of demonstration, I'm going to make that required. So you can see we're kind of building this out. And if I do need to change the order of things, I can just drag and drop. It's very easy. So you can, so like for instance, if this needed to go here, right, I can drag it just like that. And see how I can very easily, I'm just left clicking and dragging. That's going to change the order. So as I'm building, if I realize, hey, I want this section to go above the preceding section, right? I can just click it, drag and drop, and change it up. So it's a good way to keep building. Last thing I'm going to do here, I'm going to just let's add one more field just to make it interesting. Again, we're selecting our webinar note, and let's say maybe number of incidents, right? Maybe we want to capture the number of incidents that have occurred. And so that could actually be a true number field. And again, let's put this in the body. All right, so we've got our template built. One of the other key things here is actually the note configuration piece. So that is typically under billing and services. The reason why this is so important is this is typically where you assign the default template for the service. So you should see note configuration. And I'm going to work with this IIH with the intensive in-home service. This could be any service, right? This could be a community living and support. This could be community networking. If it's a service that where you're using a grid node and keys are applicable, that's where you would select the keys. Now for this particular service, again, this is a clinical note that I've built. So we're going to be looking at a clinical note. We're going to be attaching any sort of keys to this. And I am going to go ahead and select, again, that webinar note. So this is where you define the default template. So every time the service gets used, every time somebody creates a note against that particular service, that default template is going to automatically pull. Okay, so super, super important step. That's where you do that. And then I want to go ahead and save. And then just a couple of other things I'll just mention here. This is where you could set auto approve notes. So if it does not require supervisor approval, that's where you could set that. Lock note on scheduling would be where you can actually set where the schedule is required to be created in order for a note to be completed. So again, just a couple of other things here. All right, so let's take a look at it. Let's look at this note that we've created. We've created this webinar note. So very easy to do. Again, if you required a schedule, then we'd be going through scheduling. But just for the purpose of the demo, I'm just going to go straight to note. And I know I've got this client here, Johnny Cool. And so for, let's say that I needed to complete my note for yesterday, and I haven't done that yet. All right, here's my intensive in-home, IIH. There's that webinar note. So you can now see it's automatically pulling that webinar note. So this is what it looks like in its final presentation. We've got those sections right up here in the header. And now we have the start, which means push it ahead of the purpose section. That's where we've got the presenting symptoms requiring immediate action. And then we've got, again, this is by selection. So, a lot of this may be familiar to you. Purpose of contact, intervention effectiveness. Those are just common parts of the PI node. And then here's that required field indicated by the red asterisk, the additional comments, right? So, incidents today, maybe something like that. And then we would maybe put 0, right? And then, of course, any of these required fields we would have to complete. So that's kind of what it looks like here from the desktop perspective. With the last few minutes that we've got here, I do want to actually show what it looks like from the mobile. So let's go ahead and do that. Right. All right, so here's the mobile app. So let's again just kind of take a look at what is that brand new node template look like that I just created from the mobile perspective. So again, I'm just going to go straight to nodes. I'm going to click on create node. Let's say my service date is today. Let's say that, yep, there's Johnny Cool, there's my guy, and there's my intensive in-home. Let's say this is a duration of an hour. And now let's go ahead and start that note. And let's take a look at what this looks like from the mobile perspective. So here we go. We've got the presenting symptoms, right? So we've got that section right there. So that's, again, that first section. Next, we got the type of contact. Was this face-to-face? Was this done? Yep, maybe this was face-to-face in the office. And then here we go. Here we've got the header section, right? The client presented thoughts. The client was recently hospitalized, right? So any of those. So again, just so you have an idea, what does this actually look like from the perspective of using the mobile app? Same idea, just a different presentation. There's my intervention section. You'll notice I didn't complete the intervention section. That's a required field. It's now marked in red if you're following along the horizontal dashes along the bottom. I can always get back to that just by hitting on previous. I can go next. There's effectiveness. And again, there's kind of that final, yeah, that's the required, the additional comments pertinent to treatment. And then, hey, did we have a number of incidents? Nope, 0. Right, none. So again, same idea, just from the perspective of the mobile app.